Hey there, it's Tony Curl here, and welcome to episode 38 of the Dumb Leaders podcast, the podcast that brings you a library of lessons learnt from lousy leaders. Now, this podcast and other lessons are available at dumbleaders.com, and if you want to share some feedback, please do so. Just click on the contact link on the website. Today's episode, I'm sharing another cognitive bias that damages leadership and businesses everywhere. It's called the Ostrich Effect, and this may appear to be self-explanatory, but let's look into it anyway. What do you reckon?
I just think that would be fun.
Absolutely, Brenda. I think it would be fun too. Now, our definitions today come from the website howtogetourOwnWay.com. And thanks to their very unique style, we've actually got two biases. We have the easy definition of the bias, and we have the geeky definition of the bias. So, first up, the easy definition of the ostrich effect. Don't ignore the bad things happening. That's the ostrich effect. It doesn't make them go away. And yes, it doesn't make them go away. Now, the geeky definition is in two parts. The ostrich effect is the tendency to ignore a dangerous or risky situation. Now, this bias takes its name from the widely held, although completely incorrect, belief that an ostrich will bury its head in the sand when faced with danger. People will demonstrate this kind of behavior by blotting out a problem from the mind instead of tackling the situation which threatens them.
But I won't get into the details of those. I just want people to realize that I'm not a fool.
And thank you, Glenn. So have you seen this bias in action? And many times we will have. Often we see this bias in the form of a leader that doesn't want to hear about problems. In fact, very vocal in living a life of blissful ignorance. Often they shoot the messenger, if in fact that messenger brings them bad news, poor results, or whatever it is. They don't want to hear from the messenger, so they shoot the messenger, and ultimately they end up throwing people under the bus. You know, the reality is, in business as in life, shit happens. We know that. Shit will happen. Sometimes things happen that are outside of our control. They happen. Now, the economy might tank, sales may drop, people underperform, people leave. Bad news happens. And leaders impacted by the ostrich effect will bury their head in the sand when it comes to this sort of bad news. They don't want to deal with it. They ignore it. Most often, I would imagine that this rears its head when it comes to people issues. You know, I coach quite a number of people, and one of the constants that I find with any sort of coaching of a leader is the constancy of people issues. Now, leaders that ignore the underperformance of a team member for whatever reason are just dumb, and they're highlighting what the ostrich effect is all about. They ignore it, hoping that it will get better. And once again, this is a strategy that's built on ignorance, discomfort, and hope. Now, as we know, hope is not a strategy. Ignorance is something that we can improve and enhance, and we always need to be uncomfortable to grow. So a strategy that's built on ignorance, discomfort, and hope is really not a strategy at all, but it's certainly a strategy that we can change. Now, we also see the ostrich effects when we ignore some of those vital environmental signs that we see. Maybe consumer confidence is decreasing. Maybe the demographics are changing. You know, often in businesses, when it comes to budget setting, we see what I call the testosterone effect, where we get a heap of dominant leaders in a room all trying to outdo each other as to what they believe the results can be in the coming year. And we often end up with budgets that are unachievable, unimaginable, and certainly not motivating. So that's another example of the ostrich effect in play. because we're ignoring some of the signs that are out there. And those signs might be the environment is really just struggling. People are struggling with confidence. People are struggling with equation. The inflationary rate. People are not getting paid. Their pay's not increasing at the same rate as prices are increasing. But ignoring that doesn't help you set a budget moving forward into the new year. You know, leaders impacted by the ostrich effect ignore the signs, blissfully and sometimes willfully ignore the signs. And seriously, that's just dumb.
Don't mock. I'm not a fool.
And Glenn, we know that that's dumb. So when I coach leaders, I help them see the need to have complementary skill sets within their team. I also encourage leaders to coach courage, to have the courage to accept feedback from the team that they lead. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, of course, Tony, that's what we all do. Wrong. It's not what you all do. In fact, it's what the minority does. Coach courage in their teams and have complementary skill sets. You know, common sense and intention in leadership are two words that are very rarely matched together when we look at leadership in any sort of an organization. So I would question, do you really coach the people you lead to be courageous? And are you courageous enough to accept the feedback that they're going to give you if they are courageous? And that's the challenge that a lot of leaders face. Now, in my experience, many leaders don't. They prefer to lead in the belief that they know best and their team will follow their every command to deliver the results that they need, no matter how ridiculous that they seem to be. That is a belief that just doesn't work. Now, as a leader, if you ignore vital information, legally you may be in some big trouble. You know, we talk about due diligence, we talk about directors' duties and the like. So the higher up the chain, the greater the consequences. And the more likely, when we've got great consequences, the more likely that the effect is negated by personal responsibility and accountability. If you've got a threat of a large fine because you legally were incompetent at doing your role, that probably helps make you a bit more competent, or at least to seek advice on how to be competent. But this is less so as we move towards frontline leaders. Now, I didn't know becomes like the mantra of the ostrich effect leaders, as they take on the concept of what they don't know won't hurt them. I didn't know when something bad hits the fan. When the shit hits the fan, a leader that turns around and says, I didn't know, is more likely than not to have known and just engaged in the principles and the concepts behind the ostrich effect. They take on the concept of what they don't know won't hurt them, and unfortunately this is just not true. When it comes to bad results, they need to know so it can be addressed and resolved, no matter what that problem is. So how do you fix it? You need to have open lines of communication with your team and learn to listen without a response. Whew. Learn to listen to your team without the need to respond, especially in a defensive or a derogatory manner that shoots the messenger, because if you shoot the messenger, no one's putting their hand up to be the next one. Now, create a team that complements each other and, you know, from skills, feedback and performance, and coach courage in your team. There's 3 easy steps that you can start doing tomorrow. That's a leader's responsibility. Open lines of communication, learning to listen, creating a team that complements each other in terms of skills, feedback and performance, and coach courage in the team. 3 steps. So that's it. That's episode 38 of the Dumb Leaders podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, wherever you listen to it, please consider giving us a review. 5-star reviews certainly help us get found by others who may benefit from this particular podcast. Don't forget also to check out dumbleaders.com for more lessons from lousy leaders, not just in podcast form, but from blog post and article form. It will help you seriously become a better leader. Until next time, we'll see you later.